So you will be able to see the content of the course outline. But for my side, I will be able to see the key topics that are more important. So we shall start off from that portion. So our first topic I want us to deal with, is going to be the portfolio theory. Our first topic should be portfolio theory. Portfolio theory and asset pricing model. The asset pricing model. The asset pricing model. So the capital asset, not just the asset, the capital asset. The capital asset pricing model. So that is the same as compare. So portfolio theory or the capital asset pricing model. So that topic is divided into two. We shall discuss each separately, then we analyze. So under that, now you can have a subtopic as the portfolio theory. We can now have the first part as the portfolio theory. We can now start with the first part as the portfolio theory. We shall now start with the first part as the portfolio theory. So ordinarily, a portfolio is simply a combination of the investment securities with an aim of minimizing the risk. So let us introduce something brief on that part. We can introduce something brief on that area by summarizing that a portfolio in financial terms, refers to a collection of the investment securities. It refers to a collection of the investment securities, with an aim of minimizing the risk. It refers to a collection of the investment securities with an aim of minimizing the risk. Then we continue by writing that there are normally two types of the risks facing the company. There are normally two types of the risks facing the company. There are normally two types of the risks facing the company. There are normally two types of the risks facing the company. So A will be financial risk. So A will be financial risk. So A is supposed to be a financial risk. So under the financial risk, we summarize that it is the risk associated with, the use of the borrowed funds, in the company's capital structure, It is due to the inability of the company. It is due to the inability of the company to generate, inability of the company to generate stable income, to generate stable income, to generate stable income in order to repay the amount borrowed, to generate stable income in order to repay the amount borrowed, in order to repay the amount borrowed. So that's now A as the financial risk. Then B, we can have it as the business or operating risk. B is the business or operating risk. Business or operating risk. So under the business or operating risk, we write that it refers to the fluctuations. It refers to the fluctuations of the company's earnings. Fluctuations of the company's earnings. Fluctuations of the company's earnings due to the nature of the industry. Due to the nature of the industry, due to the nature of the industry where the company is operating, due to the nature of the industry where the company is operating, nature of the industry where the company is operating, where the company is operating. It is also known as the total risk. It is also known as the total risk. It is also known as the total risk because it is a combination of, it is a combination of systematic risk and unsystematic risk. It is a combination of systematic risk and unsystematic risk. It is a combination of the systematic risk and unsystematic risk. So we can start with the A as the systematic risk. We can start off with the A as the systematic risk. Systematic risk. So under the systematic risk, we summarize that it is a risk which cannot be eliminated. It is a risk which cannot be eliminated. It is a risk which cannot be eliminated. Which cannot be eliminated or diversified, or minimized, by holding the portfolio, or minimized by holding the portfolio, or minimized by holding the portfolio. It is due to the fluctuations. It is due to the fluctuations in the company's earnings. It is due to the fluctuations in the company's earnings. The fluctuations in the company's earnings. The now B is unsystematic risk. B is now the unsystematic risk. B is meant to be an unsystematic risk. So under the unsystematic risk, we summarize that it is a business risk. It is a business risk that can be eliminated. It is a business risk that can be eliminated, or diversified, that can be eliminated or diversified, or minimized by holding a portfolio, or minimized by holding a portfolio, or minimized by holding a portfolio. Then another paragraph, we write that the business risk can be represented using a diagram as follows. The business risk can be represented using a diagram as follows. The business risk can be represented using a diagram as follows. The business risk can be represented using a diagram as follows. So this one will be number of securities forming a portfolio number of the securities forming the portfolio. Then this side, we are going to have the risk. So that is now how we can show it using a diagram. So now after that, let us also have a subtopic as measures of the relationship between the security returns. We can now also have a subtopic as measures of the relationship between the security returns. Measures of the relationship between the security returns. Measures of the relationship between the security returns. Now look at the measures of the relationship between the security returns. So we start with number one. Number one will be covariance. So number one is meant to be the covariance. Number one is meant to be a covariance. Number one is meant to be a covariance. So when it comes to the covariance, we summarize that it indicates whether there is a positive or negative relationship. It indicates whether there is a positive or negative relationship. It indicates whether there is a positive or negative relationship. A positive or negative relationship between the returns of the securities. Between the returns of the securities forming a portfolio, between the returns of the securities forming a portfolio, between the returns of the securities forming a portfolio. It is normally expressed as follows. It is normally expressed as follows. It is normally expressed as follows. So to compute the covariance between security X and Y, get the covariance between security X and Y, we simply get the summation from the first observation to the last. Then you take the returns of X minus expected return for X. Also return for Y minus expected return for Y. Then we multiply by the probabilities like that. So covariance between X and Y, we simply get the summation return for X minus expected return for X, return for Y minus expected return for Y. Then we multiply by the probabilities for that. So I want us to use a question from our past papers. I want us to use a question from the past paper. So the first question I want us to check, November 2019, question 3, part B. November 2019, question 3, part B. So we have seen the question. So we can go through the question for November 2019, question number 3, part B. November 2019, question number 3, part B. So the question reads that Duncan Kipchumba has an investment capital of shillings 1 million. Investment capital of shillings 1 million. He wishes to invest the funds in 2 securities. He wishes to invest the funds in 2 securities, X and Y. So the following proportions of shillings 200,000 in security X and 800,000 in security Y. So the return on these 2 securities depend on the state of the economy as shown below. So they have given you the state of boom, normal, and also recession. Then you are given the probability return for security X and also the return for security Y. So required, Roman letter 1, expected return on the portfolio. Roman letter 2, correlation coefficient between security X and security Y. But before you get that correlation coefficient, you must first get the covariance. Then Roman letter 3, portfolio risk, then also reduction in risk due to the portfolio diversification. So we can start off with first expected return for each. We start by calculating the expected return for X. So to compute expected return for X, we get the summation from the first to the last. So we get the return of X multiplied by the probability for each occurring. So the first one is 18. Probability of it occurring, it is 0.4. We also add the next one is 14. Probability of it occurring, it is 0.5. We also add the next one, which is supposed to be 12. Probability of it occurring, it is 0.1. So when you add them together, they should be able to give you the expected return of X. You'll get the expected return for X. You'll get the expected return for X. Then also you will compute expected return for Y. Return for Y. Also, you multiply by the probabilities for that. So this one you get 24. Also multiply 0.4. Also 22 multiplied by 0.5. Then 21 also multiply 0.1. So confirm the first one is supposed to give us which percent? So when you compute the one for X, it should give you around 15.4. So this one should give you around 15.4. Then the next one is supposed to give you 22.7. Should be able to give you 22.7. So after that, we can now get the covariance. After that, we can now get the covariance between X and Y. So after you have calculated the expected returns, we should now get the covariance. So to get now the covariance, want now to get the covariance between X and Y. So there are three observations. We use that formula up there. So the first return for X, it is 18 minus expected return, which is 15.4. Then the first return for Y, it is 24 minus expected return, which is 22.7. The probability of it occurring, the first one is 0.4. So we get the value for that. We also go to the second one. It is meant to be 14 minus 15.4. Then also 22 minus 22.7, 0.5. So calculate those figures, add them together. They should be able to give you what is supposed to be the covariance between X and Y. That is now what will give us the covariance between X and Y. Yeah, this is the first class. This is the first class. So I want us to have a short break for the prayers. We can have a short break for the prayers. Then we come back, then we continue from that. But this is the first class. This is the first question we are doing. It is the question for November 2019, question number 3, part B. November 2019, question 3, part B. All the information that we have done so far on the question is at this area. So let us have a short break for the prayers, then we come back. Yes. Yeah. So when you add the totals, what figure are we coming up with? So those who are online, you are getting around which figure? It is 2 point what? So those who have calculated and added this part, we should be able to get 2.42, isn't it? Yeah, I've been given a figure of 2.42. So that is the first measure. That is the first measure, which is the covariance. It's the first measure, which is supposed to be the covariance. So we go to the measure number 2. So we go to the measure number 2. We go to the measure number 2, which is supposed to be the correlation coefficient. Go to the measure number 2 as the correlation coefficient. We go to the measure number 2 as the correlation coefficient. Correlation coefficient. So first, we can write something brief about correlation coefficient. We can write something brief about the correlation coefficient. So we summarize that it indicates the extent of the positive. It indicates the extent of the positive, extent of the positive or negative relationship. It indicates the extent of the positive or negative relationship, the extent of the positive or negative relationship. And it is expressed as follows. And it is expressed as follows. And it is expressed as follows. So, to compute the correlation coefficient between X and Y, to get the correlation coefficient. So R will be representing correlation coefficient. So between X and Y, it will be given by the covariance between X and Y divided by the standard deviation for X multiplied by the standard deviation for Y. So to get the correlation coefficient between X and Y, we simply come up with the covariance between X and Y divided by the standard deviation for X multiplied by the standard deviation for Y multiplied by the standard deviation for Y. So far, we have already calculated the correlation, so the covariance. So what we need to do now is to get the standard deviation for X and also the standard deviation for Y. So we can start by computing the standard deviation for X. We can start off by calculating the standard deviation for X. So standard deviation for X, to compute the standard deviation for X, we simply get the summation from the first to the last. There were 3 observations. So return for X minus expected return for X, like that. So we square, then we multiply by the probability, then we shall be coming up with the square root. So the first return for X, it is 18. Expected return is 15.4 square. The probability is 0.4. The second return for X, it was 14, also minus 15.4. square. The probability of it occurring was 0.5. We do the same for the third one, which is 12 minus 15.4 square. The probability is 0.1. So get the totals, then you come up with the square root of that. So get that total and get the square root for that element. So from my side, that total should be able to give you 4.84. So you should be able to get a total of 4.84. 4.84. So when you get the square root of that figure, it should be 2.2. When you get the square root of that figure, it should be able to give you 2.2. So be able to give you 2.2. Like that. So that is now the standard deviation for x. So we also compute the standard deviation for y. We shall also be required to calculate the standard deviation for y. So standard deviation for y, the standard deviation for y, we simply get the summation from the first to the last. So there are 3 of them. So return for y minus expected return for y. Also square multiplied by the probability, and we get the square root of that total. Get the square root for that total. So the first return for y was 24 minus expected return, which is 22.7 square, then 0.4. The second return is 22 minus 22.7 square, 0.5. The next one is 21 minus 22.7 square, also 0.1. So get that total, then you get the square root. So we get that total, then we shall be able to come up with the square root. So you compute that total, then be able to get the square root. So from my side, when you add them together, you will get 1.21. When you add them together, you come up with 1.21. So when you get the square root, it will simply be 1.1. When you get the square root, it will simply be 1.1. Simply be 1.1. So once we have done that, we can now go back and compute the correlation coefficient. We can now calculate the correlation coefficient, which now be in a position to get the correlation coefficient. Correlation coefficient between x and y, is simply the covariance between x and y, standard deviation of x multiplied by the standard deviation for y. So the covariance we had already calculated. It was 2.42, got 2.42, 2.42. The standard deviation for x, it was 2.2. The one for y, got 1.1. So you calculate so that we come up with what is supposed to be the correlation coefficient. We get now the correlation coefficient, which is the same as your Roman letter 2 of the question. We can now get the correlation coefficient, which is the same as the Roman letter 2 of the question. So when you commute, you are getting that figure as +1. You are getting that figure as +1. So that is our Roman letter 2 of that question for November 2019, where they wanted you to get the correlation coefficient. So before you get the correlation coefficient, you must have calculated the covariance. So I've already shown you how to get the covariance. Then a new paragraph, we can write that. Now in the notes, we can add there a new paragraph by summarizing that the correlation coefficient between the securities, the correlation coefficient between the securities, correlation coefficient between the securities will range or vary. It will range or vary from -1 to +1, from -1 to +1, from -1 to +1. Then another paragraph, we write that +1 means that the two securities are perfectly positively correlated. +1 means that the two securities are perfectly positively correlated. The two securities are perfectly positively correlated. They are perfectly positively correlated. And if they are combined to form the portfolio, and if they are combined to form the portfolio, and if they are combined to form the portfolio, then there will be no risk minimization. If they are combined to form the portfolio, then there will be no risk minimization. There will be no risk minimization or diversification. There will be no risk minimization or diversification. There will be no risk minimization or diversification. Then another paragraph is that -1 means that the two securities are perfectly negatively correlated. -1 means that the two securities are perfectly negatively correlated. The two securities are perfectly negatively correlated. Perfectly negatively correlated. And if they are combined to form the portfolio, and if they are combined to form the portfolio, if they are combined to form the portfolio, then there will be 100% risk diversification. If they are combined to form the portfolio, then there will be 100% risk minimization. Then there will be 100% risk minimization. There will be 100% risk minimization. Then another paragraph, we write that if the correlation coefficient is positive, if the correlation coefficient is positive, then the standard deviation of the portfolio, will be the weighted average. Then the standard deviation of the portfolio will be the weighted average. Then the standard deviation of the portfolio will be the weighted average. It will be the weighted average. So we are saying that in this question, the correlation coefficient was positive. The correlation coefficient between X and Y was positive. So if it is positive, to compute the standard deviation of the portfolio, to get the standard deviation of the portfolio, it is simply the weighted average. It is simply the weighted average, whereby you get the weight of X, the standard deviation for X. Then you add the weight for Y, the standard deviation for Y. So when you want to calculate the standard deviation of the portfolio, it will simply be the weighted average, whereby you take the weight for X multiplied by the standard deviation for X. Then you add the weight for Y also multiplied by the standard deviation for Y. So to get the weights, you check up there in the first paragraph. The amount invested was 1 million. X was taking 200,000, then Y was taking 800. So the weight for X will be 0.2 million divided by 1 million. Then standard deviation for X, it was 2.2, like that. Then the weight for Y, it will be simply be 0.8 millions, also divided by 1 million. The standard deviation for Y is 1.1. So this is the same as 0.2 multiplied by 2.2. Yeah, 0.2 million divided by 1 million is the same as 0.2. Then you also add 0.8. You also multiply 1.1. So when you combine them together, you will come up with the standard deviation for the portfolio. So when you add them, they will simply give you the standard deviation of the portfolio. So when you combine them together, they should be able to give you the standard deviation of the portfolio. So when you compute, you are getting 1.32. So when you calculate, you will get 1.32. I've seen that on the online class. Then now another paragraph, we summarize that. Another paragraph, we summarize that if the correlation coefficient is negative, if the correlation coefficient is negative, if the correlation coefficient is negative, then the standard deviation of the portfolio, if the correlation coefficient is negative, then the standard deviation of the portfolio, will be the weighted difference. Then the standard deviation of the portfolio will be the weighted difference. The standard deviation of the portfolio will be the weighted difference. So we are saying that if the correlation coefficient we are simply saying that if the correlation coefficient between X and Y is negative, if the correlation coefficient between X and Y is negative, then the standard deviation for the portfolio will be the weighted difference. Whereby you get the weight of X, the standard deviation for X, but you subtract the weight of Y and the standard deviation for Y, like that. So if it is negative, we shall be subtracting. But this question, it was positive, so we cannot compute this part. We cannot calculate this part because it was positive. Yeah, so that's now how to compute the standard deviation of the portfolio. Then another paragraph, we can now write that. We can now also write that the actual standard deviation of the portfolio, or the actual risk of the portfolio. So the actual standard deviation of the portfolio, or the actual risk of the portfolio, is calculated as follows, or the actual risk of the portfolio is calculated as follows, So when we want to calculate the actual risk, so when you want to compute the portfolio risk, the actual risk. So to get the actual risk, or the actual standard deviation of the portfolio, or the actual standard deviation of the portfolio. So actual risk or actual standard deviation for the portfolio, you simply take the weight of X squared, the variance of X, the weight of Y squared, the variance of Y. Then we also add the 2 multiplied by the weight of X, multiplied by the weight of Y, multiply the covariance between X and Y, then we shall come up with the square root of that portion. We shall be able to come up with the square root of that area. So you simply take the weight of X squared multiplied by the variance of X. We also add the weight of Y squared multiplied by the variance of y. Then we also add in brackets 2 multiplied by the weight of x, the weight for y, also the covariance between x and y. So we already have those details. Remember the weight of x, it is 0.2. So you take 0.2 squared. Then the variance for x, you simply square the standard deviation. Also 0.8 squared. Then you also square the standard deviation for y, which was 1.1. We already have them like that. Then we add 0.2, that's the weight for x, 0.8, the weight for y. Then the covariance between x and y, we had calculated, it was 2.42. It was 2.42 like that. Then now you will come up with that square root. We shall now be able to come up with that square root. So calculate and give me that figure. So that is the same as your Roman letter 3 of the question. When you check through the question, that is the same as the Roman letter 3, where they wanted you to calculate the portfolio risk. So anyone who has calculated? So it is not 1.9. If you compute, you should get 1.32. So I've seen 1.32, but someone else got 1.988. So confirm the figure. It should be able to give you 1.32. it should be able to give 1.32. So it should be able to give you 1.32. You should be able to get 1.32. Then now we can add there another paragraph by summarizing that the percentage of the risk diversification or minimization, the percentage of the risk diversification or minimization, the percentage of the risk diversification or minimization by holding the portfolio, is calculated as follows. By holding the portfolio is calculated as follows. By holding the portfolio is calculated as follows. So if you want to get the percentage of the risk minimization or diversification, if you want to get the percentage of the risk minimization or diversification, so percentage of the risk minimization percentage of the risk diversification, it is supposed to be given by the weighted standard deviation of the portfolio. We subtract the actual standard deviation of the portfolio. We also divide by the weighted standard deviation of the portfolio. Then we express it as a percentage. So when you want to get the percentage of the risk diversification, you simply take the weighted standard deviation of the portfolio minus actual standard deviation for the portfolio. You also divide by the weighted standard deviation for the portfolio. Then you express it as a percentage. So the weighted, we calculated, it was 1.32. The actual, we also calculated, it was also 1.32. You also divide by 1.32. So when you show it as a percentage, you will get a 0. When you express that figure as a percentage, we shall definitely get a 0. Because if you confirm, when you calculated, the correlation coefficient between X and Y was +1. If you remember, when you calculated the correlation coefficient between X and Y, that figure we got, it was positive. Then when you go back in the notes, I had explained that +1 means that the two securities are perfectly positively correlated. If they are combined to form the portfolio, there will be no risk minimization. That's why we get a 0 from that point. So that is your Roman letter 4 in the question. When you got the Roman letter 4, they wanted you to calculate the reduction in the risk due to the portfolio diversification. So we can now simplify by noting that therefore, if security X and Y are combined to form the portfolio, Therefore, if security X and Y are combined to form the portfolio, if security X and Y are combined to form the portfolio, then there will be no risk minimization. Then there will be no risk minimization. Then there will be no risk minimization. So I also want us to write something brief about expected return of the portfolio. We can write something brief about expected return of the portfolio. We can write something brief about the expected return of the portfolio. Expected return of the portfolio. The expected return of the portfolio. So under the expected return of the portfolio, we write that it is the weighted average. It is the weighted average of the individual securities' expected returns. It is the weighted average of the individual securities' expected returns. It is the weighted average of the individual securities' expected returns. And it is expressed as follows. 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 So when we want to compute expected returns of the portfolio, expected return for the portfolio, it is simply the weighted average. It is simply the weighted average, whereby we get the weight of X multiplied by expected return for X. You also add the weight for Y, then expected return for Y. So we have all of them. Like expected return for X, it is 0.2. If you check, when we started the question, we had calculated the expected return for X, and it was 15.4. It was 15.4. Then the weight for Y, it is 0.8. The expected return for Y, also if you check in the when we started the question, we got 22.7. You are able to get 22.7. So when you combine them together, you should now be able to get what is supposed to be the expected return of the portfolio. You should be able now to come up with the expected return of the portfolio. So that is now all about that question. So that part, last part is the Roman letter 1 of the question. What you are getting there is the same as the Roman letter 1 of the question, where they wanted you to compute the expected return of the portfolio. That is the same as the Roman letter 1, where they wanted you to get the expected return for the portfolio. So that's now the first question we have done. Then I also want us to stop there because this is our first class, so that when we meet, I'll now get another question, because if I start another question now, I'll not be able to finish. So let us stop there because we have a class tomorrow. When we meet tomorrow, now we shall check another question in relation to that. But for now, we stop there. We can stop there for now.